Okay, welcome everyone to our tutor forum on embedded tutoring. And I want to take a minute to let you know how the functionality works before I introduce our panelists and everyone. Number one, if you'd like to pose a question, please use the Zoom group chat and also let us know where you're from so we can see that. All those questions and chat will be saved with the recording. So you guys will have access to this later. We will send out a recording of the forum later today that it will have captioning as well. So I would encourage you to leave your camera on so you guys can see each other. It's like kind of like we're in a room together. And if you'd like to use, up at the top right in Zoom, there is speaker view, which does one speaker at a time. You're probably seeing me in a larger screen. But if you go up there and you click gallery view, you'll see everyone. And there's actually 2 screens of us because there are 43 of us right now, which is really fantastic. I think that might be a record. So thanks for logging in. Welcome you all. I'm Ted Blake. I'm the ACTLA Professional Development Coordinator. I serve on their board as an appointed member. And I'm here today just to welcome you and kind of facilitate the proceedings. And I will let Edward, who is my co-host, introduce himself, and then we'll have the panelists introduce themselves briefly and jump into our questions.
Great morning, everyone. This is Edward Pollard. I'm president-elect of ACTLA, and I'm glad you could join us today.
Okay.
My name is Lindsay Laney, and I'm the current president of ACTLA, and I'm at Columbia College in Northern California.
Great. Vandana, you're muted. Hold on.
Oh, still muted.
Go ahead, Ray.
I'll jump in. Ray Sanchez, immediate past president with ACTLA, and happy to be here chatting with you all today.
Sounds good.
And I'm Vandana Gavaskar from Santa Barbara City College. I'm the California Advocacy Coordinator and have embedded tutoring at my campus.
Sounds good. So we're going to get started. And as I said before, if you're new to the forum or if you're just logging in, if you could introduce yourself in the chat. We've got people from all over the place and really appreciate if you could do that so we know who is here. I'm not going to have the time to announce everybody, but really a warm welcome from all of us at ACTLA.
And I'll introduce myself as well.
Oh,
I'm Margaret Moodian, and I'm on the appointed board, and I'm with Irvine Valley College and Brandman University as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, she's part of our team also. Okay, so we're going to get started. We have some pre-written questions just to be ready and make good use of our time. But as you all have questions, please post those in the chat, and Edward and I will be keeping an eye on that, and we'll move to those. So first of all, I just like to ask our panelists, how do you guys define embedded tutoring? Just briefly, what is it? I think many of us know, but how do you see it?
I guess I could start. I think it's a philosophy of student learning, and it's about a structure where the embedded is actually happening connected to a particular section and in the section for part of the time. And so the context is sort of what determines it too. But the philosophy is very much the student learning of everybody in the class as opposed to self-selected learners.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add that then it's somebody who's working with the students, but also closely with the instructor.
Yeah, I would add that we want to be able to distinguish it from supplemental instruction, and that if there's activity in the classroom, so the student tutor is as active as the instructor will allow. The instructor has created a classroom, ideally, that's much more cooperative or collaborative in nature, which really maximizes the use of the embedded peer tutor. And that is the polar opposite. It's the other side of the spectrum with supplemental instruction. I also want to add there, I see names and faces that are experts. So I'd love to hear later really what you're doing, because I'm learning as I go as well. But there's a lot of folks on here that I recognize, and I know you guys are doing great things.
That's great. Thank you. So we'll look forward to your questions. Thank you, panelists. We'll go to another question here and just ask you guys why. This is, I think, been our highest attendance for a tutor forum. So obviously this is a hot topic. Why is embedded tutoring expanding so quickly and gaining attention right now at this moment.
Well, can I just jump in here and say, where does that name embedded tutoring come from? Right? I don't like to connect student tutors with the word bed, personally. But here's where we're at. Maybe we need to work at as a field on some defining our terms, supplemental instruction, learning assistance, developmental education, all these embedded tutoring, all the things that we do. How do we distinguish them? So that's some of the work I think we need to do. I think it's growing because we know SI has worked for decades.
SI being?
Supplemental instruction.
Thank you.
Which again places a faculty recommended student mentor leader in the classroom with an instructor, but they play a very passive role. They are a model student taking notes, following along. And they have these really effective sessions outside of class just for that section they're embedded in. Whereas, again, embedded tutoring works at making the student in the classroom much more active. I like this. I know the TA question might come up, and we're not TAs. We're not the TAs in the high school sense, nor the university sense, but we are certainly active in the classroom, in a collaborative classroom. But we don't need a collaborative classroom to have embedded tutoring. So as much as the tutor can do to be engaged and interact with students, I think you're going to see a huge benefit, and we'll sort of talk through what those benefits are. I would just answer the question by saying faculty, disciplined faculty, instructors teaching are recognizing now more than ever the importance of having a partner in the classroom, the importance of connecting to the Learning Assistance Center on our campuses. They're maybe for the first time or recently anyway, beginning to look at the data more carefully that we're providing in terms of tutoring and supplemental instruction and embedded tutoring. So they see that it's working. I think it connects academic affairs and student affairs like no other kind of service can. So we're connecting what's typically referred to as some sort of support service to the classroom. And that puts the instructor a little bit more in control, a little bit more responsible for student learning. So I think it's all those reasons.
And I also think it's in step with what we know about learning, learning that happens in a classroom and what happens in terms of neuroscience and collaborative learning. And for me, the equity piece is huge because you can have a number of students who are going to be on fire when they get in a classroom, but then a number of students might check out or not be as involved. But if we have the embedded tutor and we've got collaborative learning going on, everybody gets a chance to see how do you work with a certain subject area and how do you succeed, which is different from STEM to English to history and psychology.
And I would also say that maybe just tutoring in general is gaining more attention. And so, embedded tutoring is linked with that. There's much more support. I mean, when I came into my position, they were in process of growing the tutoring center. And so I think it just goes along with just people understanding more, and we're just brought more to the limelight about the effects of tutoring and the positive effects. And so embedded tutoring just, builds right into that.
Yeah, I see in the chat, some people are mentioning AB 705, and certainly true. Nationally, the move towards a co-requisite model, the demise of developmental education, of course. So more students coming to us, no better prepared, are coming into transfer level courses. So it's putting a lot of pressure on the institution and disciplined faculty, and they're looking for solutions. And so obviously what we've done for decades and decades is effective. We're just building those partnerships now in light of the change that's coming in AB 705 and other things across the country. I want to add just a side note to this. What we don't want to say to faculty as we're promoting and encouraging them to have our embedded tutors in their classrooms, we don't want to say that they have to have collaborative learning in their class. We can call it embedded tutoring, and it can still be a typical traditional kind of lecture course. I think we just get them in the room, and that's a good place to start. What can follow from that is lots of good change in the classroom, curricular change, pedagogical change that may come once the instructor realizes that this TA, this embedded tutor, can be really effectively used. And then we help train them as we go. rather than expect that the class has to be a full out collaborative kind of class. So, side note.
Yeah, I think that's
wanted to add that, you know, AB 705 is a new thing, but I think with the long view, for those of us who've been in embedded tutoring for a while, there's always been some impetus, but I think it's really helped us to learn more about our students. So I think the AB 705 just helps us see, you know, how students can do better in a more integrated environment.
and I think for those of you who don't know, the AB 705 is an assembly bill. It's a law in California that is it's going into effect in the fall. And so that's essentially, we have most of our students will be placed directly into college level math and English with the help of a co-rec and hopefully sometimes an embedded tutor, which I think is where we are right now. It's really pushing that. And as Ray says, our faculty are being pushed by AB 705. I know our math department here did not do any innovation, whereas our English department did. And so those faculty are now really looking to us for help. They've written co-requisites, but also in terms of the tutoring and what we can offer. And I think, as Ray said, getting the tutor in the door and then looking at how is the curriculum going to change over time when you see you've got a tutor in the classroom that's accessible to you and what you can do is different. So that's good.
Right. Let me add one last thing, Ted. We are over impressed with ourselves in California, but other states are way ahead of us.
Exactly.
As Rebecca just mentioned. In Florida, for example, it's been at least 3 years, I want to say, that students can opt out of developmental education. That is to say, the opposite of that is to say that they can opt into transfer level courses. They're not required to take those classes, but they're still on the books. So we're talking about 1 or 2 or 3 level below transfer level classes. Whereas here, we're in California, we are essentially doing away with them altogether in math and English.
Yeah.
Ted, there's some things coming from the chat. One is the cost of embedded tutoring as a SI and how it might be cheaper. So maybe some dialogue around that. And then also what training is required for the tutor going into the class, for the faculty. What does the faculty need in terms of new skills or new tools?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the expense question, I mean, I guess why I was drawn to then more of a embedded tutoring model versus SI is that it was less structured. And then it was a conversation between the instructor and myself as far as what do they need? What do they feel like this tutor could bring to the class? And so it may be that they're just there 1 hour a week, or it may be that they're an integral part of the class. And so maybe they would be there more. So it just depends, I think, on what, you know, the instructor can then do with the embedded tutor in their class. So I think in that way, it can be less expensive because the model of SI is that they're there for every class, every lab, where then, we can work with that a little differently. What was the other question, Edward?
Well, the other question is the training. What training is required? And also, is there a match between tutors and instructors? Like, what if the match doesn't work? Where the dynamic doesn't work, and is there a set of guidelines or practices that have to happen?
Let me jump in on the cost really quickly. Yeah, SI, of course, requires that the student leader is in every class session. And I have a PowerPoint that I gave at the SI conference many years ago, I think it was 2012, this is nothing against SI. SI is clearly, the data is really, really impressive, but you don't have to be in every class. And that's where there can be some cost savings there. You don't have to have the peer leader in every class. So you certainly could. And I think the more engaged you are in the class, the more the students will come to your sessions. You should see an increase in the number of students coming to the sessions themselves, which is really our goal. Here at my campus, I'm not going to provide an embedded tutor or any other name we might call it, and then not have sessions outside of class. There has to be a right proportion. So you got to be thinking about that, and that will get to cost. In terms of training faculty, in the same way I think we have a tutor manual, a training manual in our centers, we ought to do something like that for faculty. They need to know how to best utilize this guide on the side in their classrooms. So it's going to take some work. ACTLA is working on this. We're trying to create some effective practices that the field can take and implement at their college or modify for their college. But certainly faculty need to know. I've struggled with this here. What faculty will say, what am I supposed to do with this student? How do I use them? Because they're used to, at least in a couple of instances at my college, they're used to simply just lecturing. So it's a whole rethinking about how they run their classroom. And then related to that, in the way that co-curricular classes, so you might have a math class now that has this 1 unit or 2 unit class connected to it to support student success and to see that they can make it through in one or 2 semesters. That's been fixed and built into the college in terms of curriculum and structure. What I would like to see, and I'd love to see the number of people here, what I'd like to see is that we have this fixed pedagogical change. Mm-hmm. So now it's almost integral, and faculty are clamoring for their own TA, for their own embedded tutor in their classroom. That would be the ideal. So then the classrooms are really being changed in terms of the kinds of teaching that we're doing. We'll see huge benefits in terms of student success and retention and ultimately completion if we can accomplish that.
I guess I wanted to speak to the faculty piece as a sort of a case study. So what works really well at Santa Barbara is that the faculty really collaborate on the embedded tutoring piece, and they work as partners with learning assistants. So I've seen over time how different disciplines have developed different best practices, but you know, there's a lot of crossover, but I think there's always a conversation about what peer embedded tutoring can do and in different ways in which that can do it. So I feel like if we have a partnership with faculty, then I think we're sort of then working to develop these best practices in relation to them. And some of them are also, you know, discovering new things about learning theory, which then they can share. Then they can do workshops for all our tutors, which is kind of what we do. So we're continuously trying to bring in new things from neuroscience, and I see some other topics there about growth mindset and all that. I think that's what keeps the culture dynamic, and it focuses on learning just college-wide, you know.
I want to add too. Sorry to jump in here real quickly. I'm taking over the conversation. I apologize, but this should be run by our discipline in our field.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Here's one thing that we need to make sure that we insist upon on our campuses, that a department shouldn't be running this.
Right.
It should be a centralized tutoring and learning center who have the training and experience to put these sorts of programs together. Now, to answer one of the questions about the conflict that could happen between an instructor and a peer in the class, and to mitigate some of that, well, you partner, as Vandana says, with the department, with the instructor. Allow them to recommend tutors. It has to be that way. We want them to identify the students that they want, but we'll make the final decision. Mm-hmm. The best tutors aren't the ones that got straight A's and have some white tape in the middle of their glasses necessarily.
I resemble that remark.
Sometimes they are.
They could be, but may not be. And so we make that final call because it's a lot about the soft skills that our tutors have, the rapport that they can build.
I think so too, working with the faculty, then that just creates more bridges as well to the Learning Center. I mean, through my embedded tutoring program, that's where I've been able to really connect with faculty and then really know what do the students need in their courses, and then we can continue to build our support. And then a lot of faculty then have been changing how they teach. I mean, I have a number of faculty that do a completely flipped classroom because they have embedded tutors and they have recordings that the students watch, and then it's all hands-on in their classes. And then other faculty are trying to mimic that. They see that Joe's doing that and they're really excited to know how is that working and how is he working with his tutors and things like that. So I think it is kind of one of those culture shifts that happens where they, you know, faculty are working together. And I mean, I feel fortunate that I work on a small campus. There's about, I think there's 53 of us that are full-time faculty, and that includes all non-instructional. So you know, I know all the faculty. The adjunct faculty, it's a little harder to reach because they're not on campus, you know, quite the same, but just able to work with faculty then really closely, and then they understand what's happening, you know, in our Academic Achievement Center.
That's great. I wanted to ask, just because Lindsay, you mentioned the size of your college and your program. Vandana, if you want to tell us what your program is like, just briefly, and same with Ray, just in terms of the size and the number of people involved.
Sure, and I want to talk about size, but also the costs and how it has to be related to data, because I think
Great.
that's sort of the triangle that needs to work. So we have 520 faculty who are involved with embedded tutoring, and we hire 400 tutors a semester. So it's a very large program. It's very expensive, but we also collect data. So I think when it comes time to make cuts or decide what's not working, I think we have the success data to show that that's actually worth it, because now that in California, we're going to get funded based on our success rates as well as the people that we get in the door. So I think this is going to be a good long-term view.
Vandana, did you say 400?
Yes.
What?
So this is why the faculty partnership piece is huge, because I think we have a couple of committees. I am a chair of a Senate committee that actually talks about this and actually shares all our like findings and modifications. So it's sort of a long process, but it gets a lot of people excited and talking. Yeah, it's huge.
So there's a question that's very relevant.
Oh, go ahead, Ray. Just tell us about your program, and then we'll get to the question maybe.
Real quickly, Edward, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm at a small rural college. I'm with about 50 tutors, not all of them embedded tutors, and we're really building. We had nothing. We were a grant-run program in terms of the Tutoring and Learning Center, so we're growing that out, building that up. But I come from a large urban college in the same district, of which we had 150 tutors. Many of them were ETC, or what we call ETC, which is embedded tutoring. And so it's varied. I got a couple of different experiences.
In mine, I have probably about 30 tutors, 35 tutors, and I would say maybe over 20 are embedded tutors. Some are embedded in multiple courses as well. But when I started about 5 years ago, I think we only offered, it was solely SI, and it was just for a handful of sections, where now, I have a page of all different sections of, across the disciplines, where it was more science, in the past, where we have science, English, many, many different subjects.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, guys. Go ahead, Edward.
Just a couple things. Our former ACTLA board member, Veronica Nieves, is sharing that they sign an embedded tutoring best practices document, the tutor and the instructor, which I find very unique and creative, before they start business during the semester. And then what is the distinction between learning assistants, maybe instructional assistants, peer tutors? Should it only be a peer tutor in the class? Or is it, there's some professional tutors that are in centers as well, that have their bachelor's and master's. The distinction between that.
I think it depends on your demographics and whether you're able to get a lot of tutors who are peer tutors who've just taken the class, or are more advanced in that disciplines. I think they create that sort of academic hub, in that way. But I think that that's not probably possible at every campus. So I think we have a lot of our former SBCC students who have gone on to UCSB. But I would say it's like 30%.
At my college, it's solely peer tutors that we hire. So, ours is in a peer tutor program. We don't have any professional tutors.
I'll answer that by saying that we'll take every one of these questions in the chat. Mm-hmm. And the three of us, and perhaps more, can respond more fully. I'd be happy to take each of these and sort of respond, at least what we do on our campus and what I think about these definitions and these ideas, and then we'll send that out to the listserv so that you can get your specific question answered. Mm-hmm. I'm a real believer in peer tutoring. Mm-hmm. Is there a place for professional tutors, faculty tutors? Yeah, I think that can work too, but the peer tutoring rapport, where we promote independence in learning, we provide a student perspective, that is really critical. And I think the data bears that out. So I'm really a fan of that. I'd like to see peer tutors in the classroom who themselves are going to become faculty members and will be teachers at our universities and our colleges. And so there's benefits upon benefits upon benefits to utilizing peers in this way. Mm-hmm.
And then we get to see those benefits of our tutors in our center. I mean, I was just talking with a tutor, an embedded tutor yesterday who's in a statistics class, and she said, oh, it's so wonderful to be able to be in that class again because I struggle with some of the concepts, and now I finally get it, you know, so just that, the benefits to our tutors as well. You know, it's not just the students that are in the class that are benefiting, but then here's, you know, our group of tutors who, yeah, are going to be our future colleagues perhaps, which is really cool.
I think that's right. You do create two strong groups of students, right, in the college, and also that affective learning and togetherness piece, which is huge.
Yeah, and our peer tutors are not content experts. Of course, we recognize that. But what can happen is these really highly trained, if there's no training, it's not tutoring. So our training needs to continue to get better and better and better. But when these highly trained tutors come into the classroom, it's impressive to the faculty, the level of the ability they have to sort of navigate a small group, to ask appropriate questions, to not ask some questions. Like in my training, I say you're not allowed, the tutors are not allowed to ask 2 questions. Does that make sense? And do you understand? Because that gets us nowhere. What we want them to do is demonstrate for us, either verbally or on the whiteboard, that they know the material. And so now you're asking really effective questions. The group in the classroom is really learning and growing, and it's engaging, and faculty will turn and say, wow, I want some of that. So I have experienced that at my campus.
There's a question that asks about the preparation for embedded tutors in terms of the sessions, I guess, going into the classroom. What sort of preparation, how much time is spent?
So with my tutors, we do all tutor training, you know, for all the tutors that they're expected to attend. So it's in the form of a course, and all tutors, whether or not they're embedded or not, are taking that peer tutor training course. And then if they're embedded in a class, then I have a separate training then at the start of the semester, where then I work with them about group facilitation techniques, working with faculty, and, you know, try to talk about some of those scenarios that they may run into, of working really closely with a faculty member.
Do they plan with faculty together, or is it independently?
Some of my tutors are active, and I think Ray kind of touched upon this. I mean, it just depends on the instructor and how experienced they are with the embedded tutors. Some, it is their first time, and so it may be really daunting for them to try to have an embedded tutor bring them into the class and utilize them well. So, you know, it is kind of gradual, I think. I mean, some folks have experience and they're really excited and they jump right in and they already know how to utilize them really well. And others, they need a little more training or guidance. And so I work with them, and then I work with the tutor, and then, you know, they can kind of bridge that, and then they work with the faculty member. So I would say they work really closely together. And some, yeah, are working, you know, the summer before. In our physics class, for example, the tutors, the embedded tutors and the faculty are working, you know, on the course, the next course, and the activities that they're doing.
So do you all do session reports or some sort of like planning and also some sort of regrouping after? I'm just asking all of us to do that. I think that's one way to sort of collect some qualitative data on what's going on in the sessions.
So can you explain that a little more? Like, you have your tutors do that before and after each session?
Right, and I've seen that in other embedded programs where they talk about, here's what we think we're going to be working on, and then how many people came, you know, what types of collaborative learning happened, and, you know, what could go better next time, those kinds of things.
That's great. Is that a paper form, or is it electronically that they submit?
It's actually a Google Doc here, but I'm exploring the idea of doing like some kind of app where they could do that.
Great. Yeah, that's cool.
I just want to mention a couple of things about training and then measuring or assessment, measuring success, or the assessment piece. In terms of training, I require all the student employees, all the student tutors, I should say, anyone providing learning assistance, let's put that under a big umbrella. You have to take my 1-unit tutor training course. It doesn't matter if you're a drop-in tutor, if you're in the STEM center, it doesn't matter what discipline you're helping with. You're all going to take the same class because I want you to have a foundation, basic learning theory, what our role is in and out of classroom. Is not the in-class thing is not really focused upon in the class. It's more a general introduction to what it is to be a peer learner and a peer helper. And then what we call ETC, which stands for extending the class. It's like a modified SI, it's embedded tutoring. What we do is we train them ongoing, and we meet monthly. There is a half-day orientation and things like that, but we're hiring people throughout the semester, plopping them in and throwing them to the wolves. I don't know if that happens on your campus, but it sure happens on my campus. So it's not a perfect program where you have to get X number of hours first before you can get into the classroom. We throw you on in there. But we have ongoing monthly trainings where then we focus on these sorts of things, the housekeeping things related to going into a classroom. You don't pull your phone out. You don't come in early. I mean, you can come in early, but you don't come in late. You don't leave early. You follow the guidance of the instructor. So all of the housekeeping, but then the practical additional tutor training kinds of things that they need to do in a classroom where they could work the room. They could work with an individual student. They can work in a group. There's a wide variety of activities that will happen in a classroom. Then the question is how do we even know this works? Well, there is a lot of research with SI. There's a lot of research with tutoring, and it's sort of a blend of those two things. And there's confounding variables. Like, how do we know we made all the difference? Well, who knows? But we try to look for trends. We try to look for over many longitudinal data, like are we seeing some patterns here? And I can tell you that there is research out there, both local campus-based research and much more extensive studies that will show you for the, let's pick a discipline, American history course from the Civil War to the present. If you take embedded tutors in 10 sections, those students in those 10 sections, same instructor, same semester, those students that come to the tutoring sessions outside of class will do better by far, similar to SI, will do better by far than those same students who have access to the intervention but don't utilize the intervention. And if you look at that, if you see that across discipline, across semesters, across years, you start to see a pattern. And it's certainly something that we're doing that is making the difference. We're talking about grades difference. And it really is look at how much does it cost to pay for a professional tutor? How much does it cost to run any kind of program on your campus? Untold hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is a small fraction of the cost of the campus, and it's producing great results. So we need to be shouting this to the administrators that this is a really cost-effective and efficient kind of service we can provide students that makes all the difference in the world.
I saw a question on there about scheduling as a challenge and finding, the tutors. And I would say we have the same challenge with being a small school. If there's only one section that's offered of something a semester, that's a really small pool then to find a potential embedded tutor and somebody that's going to be back the next semester, and then their schedule work. So we aren't able to offer it to everybody that then wants it. But as we certainly try, and I think then once the culture's established, then I have a lot of my tutors, then they're on the lookout, if they know that they're transferring or going to be moving on in some way, then they're like, oh, Lindsay, I have the next person who's going to take my spot, so they're looking at it as well. When it's a new subject that we haven't offered, then it might be kind of hard for that to get started or for it to get established. But the faculty then, once they're kind of in, it's a mutually beneficial relationship. So then the faculty are really looking for those people as well. But sometimes we fall short and we aren't able to offer, what we have just because then the student schedule changed. And we aren't able to get that back up. And then, it just doesn't come through. So yeah, scheduling is still a major challenge for us as well, but I think it gets easier and easier, which kind of sounds, as we get bigger, it gets a little easier, but again, it's the students recruiting, my tutors, and then also, the faculty, they have their eyes out, and sometimes they'll send me somebody, the whole year before. I have some instructors saying, okay, next spring, I want this person to be my embedded tutor, because they did really well in the class this semester.
I really like Veronica's idea of maybe you might want to call it a contract where the instructor, the center, Tutoring and Learning Center, and then the tutor sort of sign off on here's the expectations. That makes a whole lot of sense. It'll be a good. I would probably make that pretty simple and generic, that almost any instructor could do it, because if I put parameters, some instructors will opt out. Like, it's my academic freedom in my classroom. I'm going to teach it the way I am. So I really have the philosophy that I'm going to crack that nut by getting a student in the classroom. As long as they're not doing X, Y, and Z, running and making copies and just being a kind of high school TA, as long as they're not grading and reading, they're not in that role at the university, then I'm going to try it. And it doesn't always work out, but it's pushing the envelope. It's sort of being the bleeding edge of the spear. And suddenly you start to see change. So you may be at a different place at your college, but that's certainly where I'm at, where I'm, as I said earlier, throwing tutors to the wolves a little bit, giving them lots of support, but I'm trying to break through, and I don't want to have the instructors think that they have to teach a full-on flipped classroom to be able to participate.
There's also a question about the differences with coaching, peer mentoring, SI, embedded tutors, in terms of role, in terms of what are some of those differences, if any?
I think if we played a drinking game every time we heard all those letters being thrown out at us, right? We need to define what we do, and we haven't done a good job in terms of our field, right? What is a tutor? What is tutoring? What is learning assistance? As supplemental instruction, embedded tutor, all of those ideas need to really be fleshed out clearly and cleanly. So I don't have an answer to the question, but I just think that's an ongoing challenge for us to be able to define ourselves better.
And I would say that there's a lot of overlap, and this is an attempt for different programs to define what they're doing with tutoring and how it's not the traditional model in some ways, I'm guessing. But there is a lot of overlap because a peer coach may do some mentoring just like a tutor might.
This person is that's why peer tutoring, is it all they're doing in the classroom? Some do very little tutoring, let's be frank.
Right, that's what I mean.
Maybe it's a mentor, coach, tutor,
yes,
leader. It's like all those four ideas. And so I sometimes use teaching assistant in quotes because faculty can sort of, that resonates with them. And then I try to define it further. But that's part of the work, I think, on each of our local campuses where our culture might be a little different than elsewhere, trying to make that really clear to the campus.
And I think there's some baggage with the teaching assistant part too, because then is that more student-centered or more faculty-centered? So there are some things to consider. Just
well, and I would say too with SI, I mean, that is a brand name, and that's what a lot of my colleagues know. And so sometimes they'll say, oh, I just want an embedded tutor, not an SI leader. And I kind of laugh and go, well, they're pretty darn similar. You don't really then understand the difference because there's not really that big of a difference as far as what they think is the role. So I've been transitioning out of using SI, but it's been a process because that is the name that people know about and it's associated with. So, you know, kind of, again, that culture shift of defining, as Ray said, what it is and letting people know, okay, this is what we're doing. Yes, there are very similar components to it. And I do borrow, I mean, I was trained by UMKC trainer. You know, there's some amazing components that then I bring into my embedded tutor training and part of that program, including my students poll, my embedded tutors poll the students at the start of the semester, just like in an SI, to find the best times that they would then meet in our Academic Achievement Center.
Yeah, one of the questions from Jen, this was from a few minutes ago, was she says, do you emphasize that the same tutoring that happens in a center is happening in the classroom? That has been one major component of our embedded program, which is interesting. So I think it's bringing, as Ray says, we're bringing that service to the students where they are, giving them a taste of that. I don't think it'll take away if you have a center that's like a drop-in center or however it works, it's similar type of activity happening. And I think that will break down the faculty seeing the embedded tutor as, oh, well, you're not busy today. You could grade this quiz for me. You know, that would be the worst model, you know, that it is about learning and it's about everybody's a partnership in the learning of the students, keeping the students in the center. But I think I like that, Jen, that you're emphasizing the same tutoring that happens in the center is just happening in the classroom. I think that helps, but we should define what that is. And I know somebody else here said it would be great to have, and this is something we can all work on together, meaning all 77 of us, having a job description for embedded tutors, for mentors, for tutors, and kind of exploring the, as Vandana says, the overlaps between those. And the reality at our college is that we have a lot of students that, and you may have found this too, all of you, that students, they shift. You know, one semester they may be here, they may be a mentor for our FYE program, then they come into the tutoring program, then they may go to the SI program. So there's a variety of roles, but we have the same students getting that overlapping training as well.
If I can just add to that real quick, you know, the students who work with us can help define that job description, to be quite honest, because they
absolutely
know what they do, and then we can shape and help kind of solidify that.
I would say another, maybe a difference of what happens in the classroom versus outside is the just-in-time resource. I mean, there is somebody who's able to, you know, address those students' need right then, and also then know what the instructor has just said or the context of it. So that just-in-time is really important, but also then the connection back to then the tutoring center. So it's demystifying what is tutoring. All of a sudden then, oh, it's Patrick. He is the person that I will be seeing. It's not then this process of having to go someplace that you don't know where it is, you don't know what it looks like. You know, how do you make an appointment, or how, you know, how do you drop in versus, you know, oh, we'll just come with me and we'll go there and I'm going to show you. And then they usually ask, oh, do you do this for other subjects? You know, so it is then opening up the tutoring center. And so I would say that's a big component for me in the promotion of our program, is it's just fostering that connection back then to the tutoring center for the students. So then hopefully then they're seeking assistance and for other needs that they may have, or, you know, in future semesters, because they were introduced to it, because, you know, they knew who that tutor was in the class, they had established that rapport and felt comfortable then coming in to the academic achievement center, where maybe they might not have done that before. You know, they would have been too hesitant to.
And what you just said was that we created a student space, a student-centered space, right? And it's very clearly about and for students, and that's huge. I mean, I would have loved that lots of times in my life.
Yeah. I think one of the questions.
Can I mention something, Ted?
Yeah, go ahead, Ray. Yep. Go ahead.
I think I'm having some internet problems on my rural campus. Is that right?
You're
good for a second.
I'll try to talk real fast. Jen's comment is really right spot on. The ideal, if we think about this as a spectrum, supplemental instruction, no activity in the classroom by the peer, all the way down the line to a tutoring session in the classroom, that would be my ideal, to see that the practices that they implement in the tutoring and learning center are happening in the classroom. But there's everything in between that happens, and I think we're working towards more active in the classroom, whatever that looks like, case by case, instructor by instructor, discipline by discipline, I guess.
And I think somebody, Mike Lieb, said that, and I like this point, I think we have to be very careful about the use of the term teaching assistant. Teaching assistants at the university level generally have a BA already and can do grading. That's kind of getting back to that. And I'd like to ask us to think about, and this is for the wider group as well as our panelists too, is that, you know, does embedded tutoring start to begin to create a partnership that makes learning facilitation by tutors less of a secondary role and a blend between several stakeholders? So for instance, it's part of this idea that the faculty member is decentering as the authority in the classroom to create a more student-centered space. I think we've kind of been on this theme. And that's kind of a theoretical point, but I think it's real for students. You know, we already see a movement to have faculty be, obviously they are the qualified discipline expert, but in terms of the learning that occurs, can there be more of a blend? Lindsay was talking about the flipped classroom model, where some of that lecture content maybe goes on a video for students to be able to watch, and maybe watch a few times if they need the repetition, and the classroom becomes the site for this more hands-on active learning, which I think we've been seeing for many years.
Mhm.
So I guess my question for the panel is like, how has embedded tutoring kind of changed the partnership and the dynamic with your faculty in a positive way? I mean, we would never want it to be threatening. I don't think there's any reason to be threatened, but how has it created a different partnership or dynamic as you see it?
I guess I want to say that faculty on a different spectrum, depending on discipline and how they see their authority. But I think they all drink the Kool-Aid to an extent. They see what's going on in terms of student learning and how much they can learn even from their embedded tutors, but what's going on in their classroom. And I think that's hugely significant, just-in-time data for any course that's trying to, you know, focusing on student success. So I would say that they would never call it decentering their classroom, but in effect, if you're bringing in learning at the center of it, then you're moving away from the traditional pedagogical model. So,
I think the term Ray was using was the guide on the side. You know, we're in a situation where maybe that sage on the stage is an older model, or maybe that can be flipped in a different way. Yeah.
And I've seen some faculty who've then been reluctant to maybe go to, you know, a different teaching style because they think they can't quite do it. And then they have been supported by an embedded tutor. And so then they feel like, oh, now I can manage this differently as far as group projects and group activities. And, you know, some of our biology classes, for example, the faculty, you know, it's all students working in groups and the tutor is maneuvering all around. And I finally got to observe it all in action. And I saw then how essential the tutor was to the setup of the class. So I think, you know, people had been doing that for a while, but again, kind of publicizing that, sharing those best practices, and then even encouraging faculty to observe each other and say, hey, if you want to go see that, check out Misha's class and you can see how he's using his tutors and how effective they are, because there's only one instructor, you know, and they're really trying to meet the needs of the students. And then again, the role isn't different with the peer tutor. You know, quite often they'll be more reluctant to ask the instructor a question, but then they're whispering off to the side, or then they have an opportunity to ask the tutor a question and they're going to ask the tutor. They're not going to raise their hand and ask the instructor, you know, until they maybe have a little more rapport, or then the tutor is nudging them saying, ask the question. You know, everybody probably is going to have that same question. That is, you know, a major concept. So, you know, they're just reinforcing that in the class.
Sounds like a coach on the side as well.
Right.
There's a question here by Jenny from Sierra in terms of what are the stressors that embedded tutoring, that movement of embedded tutoring is putting on other in the tutoring program. So we have other programs in our centers, just embedded tutoring. And so the nexus between, you know, the resources are only go so long. What are the stressors, and are people experiencing those stressors, and how are people dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, my program, it's just me. I'm the faculty coordinator, and I have one classified instructional technician. So it's a lot to take on. And definitely there are times when I can't meet the needs of what's happening in my center. So, I mean, I do my best to meet all those needs, but it can be challenging, but I guess I've created it. So I'm trying to, you know, do my best with that.
Our embedded tutoring model is still like SI in that the tutor will go into a classroom, work with an instructor, that particular section, and then provide the tutoring outside of class just for that class. I suppose you could open that up if you didn't want to make it. You could make the outside the class sessions more like drop-in tutoring for all students and say history again. I think that won't work as well. There's a real advantage of having that person that's connected in the classroom connect with the students outside the classroom. And the SI data seems to indicate that. Doesn't seem to, it does indicate that. But I suppose that'd be one way to do it. But we still have drop-in writing tutoring. We still have drop-in STEM tutoring, especially math. and other subjects. So I don't think it's going to go away. It's just about balancing the resources, I suppose.
That's great.
Go ahead.
One thing I just want to let people know, I just launched the poll that's in progress, and I asked a few questions. So you may see that pop up. So please fill out the poll before you go. We're at 11. We have 10 minutes left. We're going to take 5 more minutes of your questions. And as Ray said, that we will have a record of all these questions. So we'll be getting back to you. And then in about 5 minutes, we'll talk more about a couple of things happening at our conference. That you can continue this conversation, and then we'll also certainly have more forums around this, or maybe specific pieces of it as we move forward. So let's go ahead and we'll have a few more questions. Go ahead, Edward. I just want to
here's some related.
Can I comment real quick on the 2 questions back about the sage on the stage and the guide on the side kind of idea. I don't think we want to, as a discipline, as a field, as a service area on our campus, be at odds with faculty beyond what we can help. Right. So, for example, there's a war on rote memorization in sort of elementary school, and I think that's an error. Right. I think there's a place for lecture. There's a place for gaining the appropriate level of background knowledge so that those synapses can continue to fire when you get more advanced material. So we don't want to be at odds with faculty who are straight lecturers. And we can still fit into their class. You may get somebody to say, I don't teach my class that way. Can I still have an embedded tutor? Yes. But again, we're gonna crack the nut eventually, hopefully, by integrating that peer in the classroom, and perhaps some things will change pedagogically for that instructor. But it's not that we want to say they need to change. They're teaching wrong. I think if we can get instructors to buy 2 books, Small Teaching and Make It Stick. Those 2, by the way, for us in our tutor training, take those books and have your tutors do those assessment strategies and activities. Man, it'll transform your tutoring sessions. So Small Teaching and Make It Stick. Those are really good. And if instructors are moving in that direction just a little bit, the class will change, the tutor will be more involved.
And I also want to add to that, I think faculty are also doing their own rethinking of pedagogy, and perhaps that's a good partnership to have. So at SBCC, we have the Faculty Resource Center, and they're doing training with ACTLA, and how do you work with different groups of students? How do you make learning to be active? And so maybe there is going to be like some sort of meeting of the minds, because we're all in it together. So.
There's a couple things. One is a call for ACTLA to gather resources, syllabi, etc. I think we've talked about that in our board meetings, etc., and how to host a site, whether that's our website or something different, so that people have access to really the pedagogy that we have. The other one is how much time outside of class sessions might take. What's an average embedded tutor to do outside of class in terms of holding exam review sessions or review sessions for some other specific discipline. And so that's probably the last question, because they're coming in rapid and running out of time. Well,
there was one, I think, real quick is, do you offer a faculty a stipend for them to participate in embedded tutoring? I have not heard of that.
I hope not.
I think it's within class time. Yeah. I think there could be a stipend if you were going to change your curriculum around having an embedded tutor, and that's a good idea to get it written into the curriculum if possible. But yeah, so
we pay our leaders. We pay our leaders in class time. We pay them for the actual session times. Usually, it's for an hour that you're in class, something like, or for one class session, because it could be more than an hour. One class session. You may have 2 to 3 hours of tutoring session time. It's not a fixed rule, but we sort of shoot for that ratio. We pay an hour for prep. So each week, the ETC leaders are putting together a session planning form where they're sort of planning out their tutoring session. And we have in the past, and we may return to this, pay for what we call meeting with the instructor time. So that kind of gets to the question about how faculty are compensated or not, but we want the leader to be connecting with the instructor even outside of class, even if it's a 15-minute informal kind of dialogue weekly.
Sounds good.
We have hours per week, and that may depend on the credit hours of the section, and the faculty have a little bit of discretion on how they're used.
And we, similar to what Ray said about, you know, the time that they're in the class, the time that they're then scheduled to be in the Academic Achievement Center. Some of them are also then general tutors, so they may be an embedded tutor, and then they have that designated time, and then they're also on our schedule for just open, you know, tutoring times of many different subjects. And then we also do what I then call kind of the on-call. So then if there's another time that, you know, their times don't work and they're available and a student reaches out to them, then they set up a different time that they can meet, you know, in our Academic Achievement Center. So I feel like that has worked well, especially when it's only been, you know, it's the one tutor for Physics 4A. And if they're available, then I say, yes, you guys can schedule that time, and, you know, then they're paid for that time as well. People were asking about those books, which I have them both. You can see what they look like. So Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning, and then Small Teaching, Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning. And we were fortunate enough, our faculty actually read Make It Stick a couple of years ago. So there's been kind of this campaign on our campus to integrate some of these things. And so it has fed right into then the tutoring center and what we're doing. And I've taken definitely these ideas and talked with my tutors about them.
I saw that Deanna asked about CRLA and how do you count time for certification or not, and I'm sure I'm going to get arrested by the Learning Assistance Police for saying this, but I'm not going to give a specific answer because I'm CRLA certified here at my college. But listen, what is SI versus tutoring? Doesn't it fall all under peer assisted learning? Mm-hmm. Why does SI not count, or why does CRLA not count SI activities? That's tutoring. Yeah. So I know the CRLA people are going to throw things at me, but listen, I think peers are being trained effectively to create collaborative learning spaces and be effective tutors, whether it's SI or tutoring. So that's another area where we got to work on, I think, as a field.
Well, and I'm gonna cut you off here and not arrest you, Ray, but we've got 2 minutes left. I want to respect everyone's time, but I want to convey to all of you that this is our community together. We're working to advocate with CRLA to be of service to you as ACTLA. We're hosting our conference later this month in Las Vegas. I don't know how many of you are going. I didn't have a chance to get that in the poll. But Vandana is doing a pre-conference session that I believe is full. But if there is an opening, just keep looking at the registration about embedded tutoring. We have some sessions on embedded tutoring, and there is another pre-conference session that also covers embedded tutoring that's kind of linked in with AB 705 by Crystal Keekle. So we want to, and hopefully we may see some of you there at the ACTLA conference. If not, maybe plan next year. But I want to emphasize this is our community. This is where we can come together, have these discussions, make connections. We want to stay in touch with you and be of support. And I'm really helpful to know that 36 of you have embedded tutoring on your campus. That was 69%. So that's great for us to know in the future that we can pull in a little bit different discussions. 16 folks did not. So we're kind of all over. Any other final words before we kind of sign off here for now? But I really want to thank you guys for coming. This was an incredible turnout.
I also wanted to point out that we're working on a survey of best practices that we hope to be able to bring to ACTLA, and we'll definitely poll everybody because I think we can all benefit from knowing what everybody's doing and what directions we're thinking as we're trying to move and change learning on our campus.
Great, and we will be posting the responses to the questions probably in the listserv, so you guys can all have access to that. And the recording of this plus the transcript will be on the listserv as well. So you'll be getting that later today or tomorrow. So I want to thank our panelists for being here. Ray, Lindsay, Vandana, thank you so much for sharing. Everybody who came, and many of you who also contributed so much in the group chat. And thank you, Edward, for managing all the chat and some of the technical side as we went through this. So I think we'll sign off for now in respect to your time. And thank you all so much. And we'll see you next time or at the conference.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right.